Hello everyone, I'm Becky and welcome to my blog. Today I'd like to share an observation I've recently made in my work environment and also among the people around me that has deeply inspired my thoughts on compassion. I've noticed a pattern. Those who are compassionate are mostly people who are internally rich and truly happy. Right now, as you're listening to this podcast, have you ever, whether at this moment or at some point in the past, felt lucky or happy? Please reflect on that in such moments. Do you find it easier to understand, accept, and embrace more people and things around you? Often, it's the same person, the same action, or the same event. Yet, when we are in different states of life energy and emotional condition, our perspectives, experiences, perceptions, and feelings toward a situation or someone's behavior can vary greatly. Sometimes the difference can be enormous. When we are unaware, we tend to point this initial feeling outward, toward the external world, toward other people, their actions and events that make us unhappy, unjoyful, or cause us suffering. But once we begin to become aware, we realize that anything happening in the external world is neutral, or rather empty in nature. What we experience depends entirely on how our being responds. This reaction leaves us with feelings, perhaps happiness, joy, peace, pain, sorrow, and so on. Fundamentally, it is not anything external that brings us these emotions, or imprints, rather. It is our own being, our inner response. Today, as we deeply explore the concept of compassion, I wonder if you just briefly recall the moment when you felt rich, fulfilled, and happy. Would you then find it easier to be compassionate, to embrace and accept the many people, events, and things around you? In fact, when we cultivate a sense of tolerance, the greatest beneficiary is not the outside world, but ourselves. If you also wish to develop this quality and bring more positive feedback into your life, experiencing greater happiness, then right now please click to subscribe, follow us, and even leave a comment sharing your current state of mind. Today, I'll continue exploring with you how cultivating compassion can bring greater happiness. I believe it's also a form of wisdom for survival on our life journey. At the same time, I'll share the second point: how to practice compassion with appropriate boundaries. First, let's move on to the first point: how we can develop a sense of inclusiveness. Recently, I read a book titled The Psychology of Money, which discusses how our different backgrounds, upbringing environments, education, societal standards, and cultural influences lead to vastly different understandings of money. Actually, I think this applies not only to money. About us, our understanding of anything depends on the imprints left in our brain's life experience from birth up to the present moment. These form our current cognitive framework. From this perspective, I want to explore how different people's backgrounds at birth, upbringing environments, cultural attributes, and surrounding social influences shape diverse mental attitudes and states of being. I've often heard people around me ask, "Why is he like this?" The underlying message of this sentence is, "Why is he different from me?" In truth, if we take a moment to reflect quietly, it's natural that people raised in different environments and cultural backgrounds develop distinct ways of thinking and unique personalities. However, when we insist on judging the world and others around us by our own cognitive standards, we end up struggling, pulling apart, misunderstanding, and exhausting ourselves. I believe this is often, indeed, most of the time, the root cause behind debates, attacks, attempts at persuasion, confrontation, and conflict between people. We simply cannot truly understand or accept differences. But let's consider this. Having traveled to nearly 30 countries and lived in 5 America, Britain, France, Spain, and now the Netherlands, I've deeply experienced how, from a life perspective, the country we're born into and our family background are things we have no choice over. Even during our upbringing, much of the culture and education we receive remains passive. Therefore, it's only natural that we form entirely different worldviews or express various facets of human nature at different stages of life. These differences have always existed. How can we better cultivate compassion? At its core, the first essential step is recognizing that the world is vast and diverse, and human nature is multifaceted and ever-changing. Even the same person may behave very differently depending on their life circumstances and situations. It's often difficult to fully define someone as good or bad based solely on a single action at a given moment. For example, someone who has always been kind and upright throughout decades of acquaintance might, under extreme circumstances, such as when their child or loved one is harmed, react with self-defense and protective measures that could hurt others. In such cases, are they still a good person? When we hastily label people and rigidly categorize actions as right or wrong, we don't only confront the outside world and others. We also shut ourselves off, closing the doors to each other's worlds. Every time we create labels in our minds, erect defenses, and establish rigid standards, we further isolate ourselves. We all tend to close the door of our hearts. The more labels we attach and the stricter our standards become, the tighter we shut that inner door. Therefore, at the core of compassion lies an openness, the willingness to maintain a curious mindset toward the world. I remember several years ago my teacher, Mr. Lin, mentioned a term called golden heart. This phrase means that when each of us is born, we are like a diamond, clear, pure, and as transparent as crystal. But as we grow up, perhaps some of the perceived harms, difficulties, challenges, and setbacks from the outside world have layered upon our diamond a thick coat of dust. Maybe you've experienced a friend's betrayal, a failed romance, a boss's criticism, or even being laid off. You might then define yourself as an unfortunate person in life, believing your nature is such that you're destined to be betrayed. This can lead us to build walls within our hearts. Just as layers of dust cover our diamond, life brings various experiences, including failures and mistakes. No one's journey is smooth sailing. These are simply part of the norm. What matters most is not allowing these setbacks to permanently close our hearts after just one betrayal or failure. Instead, they should serve as reminders. Let us be able to make choices and judgments more objectively, rationally, and maturely when facing similar situations and events in the future, rather than forever closing the door. Therefore, having an open heart begins with our natural curiosity, openness, and multidimensionality toward the world itself. The more open one's mindset is, the more inclusive they become. Many people around me have once said to me, "Bexy, why don't you ever get hurt? Have you really thought about this seriously?" One of the most important reasons, I believe, isn't for others' sake, but for my own. Whenever we feel resistance, misunderstanding, or lack of acceptance within ourselves, forces always act reciprocally. Our inner selves erect barriers, leading to conflict and exhaustion. Years ago, perhaps several years back, I became aware that life and human nature are unpredictable, often falling short of our expectations. To understand, empathize, and embrace differences is the lowest cost way to align ourselves with energy flow. It's the most effective method I've found to protect my own life force. That's why I often joke with people around me, inclusion isn't for your sake. It's for mine. What I'd like to explore further is the idea of measured tolerance. Otherwise, many people might interpret tolerance as compromise, self-sacrifice, or forced accommodation, tolerating simply because they feel they should. This kind of tolerance can actually create a blockage in your inner energy, stemming from deep-seated unwillingness. In intimate relationships, this may eventually lead to genuine resistance. Therefore, the tolerance I'm referring to isn't merely superficial compliance, appeasement, or suffering for the sake of harmony. It's heartfelt and genuine acceptance. I'll use two small scenarios to illustrate measured tolerance. The first one happened recently at work in a business context. 2 weeks ago, during a business trip to France, I met with a partner we've been working with on a French project. During the meeting, the client made a rather unreasonable request, wanting me to process a return and refund without providing any information or data. At that moment, I told the client that unfortunately I couldn't proceed until I had received all the necessary details. It was difficult for me to give in and make a compromise when this customer saw that I couldn't fulfill his initial request for a refund and return. He wanted me to continue being vague and still grant him a refund. But he had another advantage. He placed a new order with us. From an ambiguous standpoint, it seemed like since he'd already placed an order, I should make some concession. I remember calmly telling the customer, "I'm sorry, I can't even consider returning one bicycle, let alone 30. Yet within that statement, there was a subtle, measured form of understanding, acknowledging his mindset and motivation. After all, he had placed an order with us. I want to take a little advantage, and I think that's perfectly normal. So I can understand it. That's tolerance. It means truly understanding that customers, in a business context, want to gain some benefits. But this tolerance must have limits. I understand you and accept you. But when it comes to business, there are my principles and bottom lines, which I need to clearly communicate and firmly uphold. First of all, without any evidence or information, being vague and ambiguous about after-sales service is not the way we want to conduct ourselves or the principle we wish to demonstrate to our customers. If we could simply be happy and satisfied whenever a customer places an order meeting all their requirements, then I asked the customer this question. If I only fulfill your demands to secure the order, can you really trust me to deliver high-quality products? Therefore, my principle in this matter is to ensure a long-term partnership based on clarity and integrity, rather than vague or ambiguous commitments. This time, I made a concession on an order, but next time we ended up in vague and endless back and forth. I really want the client to understand that I empathize with him. But these are our principles and bottom lines in business, and I hope he can respect them. First of all, when we show tolerance, it must stem from genuine understanding of the other party's position, circumstances, and original intentions. Most importantly, we avoid attacking or resisting. This measured tolerance allows us to understand, accept, and accommodate the other person's motives and actions without compromising our values. It's not about reluctantly giving in or feeling resentful, but rather sincerely expressing our own principles, boundaries, and stance. So I would say it's a measured form of tolerance, not the unlimited accommodation and compromise that many people mistakenly believe in, because ultimately such an approach leaves one feeling resentful and dissatisfied, and it won't last long. In my business environment, throughout more than 10 years of entrepreneurship. This situation has occurred many times. But in my memory, most of the time, it worked out well. We gained understanding and respect from our clients, while still maintaining our core principles in business. The second point I'd like to share is that in daily life, similar situations arise frequently, whether in relationships with parents, intimate partners, friends, or even colleagues. These are all instances where measured tolerance comes into play. In a previous blog post, I mentioned that my relationship with my parents has evolved into one of intimacy. Last week, when I called my mom, she said she feels our emotional connection growing deeper, and that she feels nourished and joyful. I believe a key reason for this is that we both respect each other's boundaries and give space to one another. Within that space, we're able to better communicate warmth and understanding. Of course, most importantly, it's about love. I've heard many friends around me struggle, feeling confused, drained, or even resisting, because their parents make demands, set standards, or offer emotional or career advice, all in the name of love, which they then feel unable to refuse. A few years ago, I gradually adjusted my way of relating to my parents. Fundamentally, if we consider their age, life background, and cultural environment, there are significant differences compared to our generation. The way they perceive the world, emotional relationships, and business matters shaped by their own upbringing is likely quite different from ours, or at least differing is perfectly normal. First and foremost, it's crucial that we genuinely understand and accept this difference from within. Their advice comes from good intentions, but it's based on their own understanding and worldview. They can only offer so much. Ultimately, it's up to us to respond with thoughtful tolerance. First, we empathize with and accept the intentions of our loved ones. They come from a place of goodwill. Of course, if certain advice comes from family members or relatives, as many of us have experienced, and it doesn't truly serve your well-being or original intentions, then perhaps there is no need to even consider inclusion. Inclusion is possible, but not necessarily required. In fact, sometimes it's best not to overthink it. Simply practice mindful, measure tolerance without exhausting yourself. We recognize that their suggestions stem from good intentions. Yet our own upbringing, cultural background, and educational experiences shape our personal understanding of life responsibility. There are no absolute right or wrong answers. Each of us is on our own unique journey of growth. No one intentionally makes a wrong decision about their own life. Rather, the outcome we experience is simply shaped by our perceptions. With measured tolerance, we recognize that we are solely responsible for our own choices, allowing us to calmly and sincerely express gratitude, thank them for their advice, for wanting to help, for offering warmth and love. Yet, ultimately, it is we who make the final decision, and we also hope for their understanding, acceptance, and respect. I would be deeply grateful for that. So far, this approach has proven effective in maintaining close relationships with my parents and friends around me. First, I don't have internal conflict, and I clearly understand that if my mindset changes, it's not because of the other person, but due to my own inner instability. Ultimately, I must take responsibility for every decision in my life. Therefore, all external opinions are merely references. Second, one crucial aspect in any relationship is authenticity and honesty, being able to genuinely express gratitude toward each other, and appreciating when the other person continues to give us space, understanding, and respect for our freedom. I wouldn't say it applies to everyone, but some people, perhaps even a majority, are still willing to understand and accept. There is a cliched saying, we become the kind of person we hope to meet, and believing what we wish to see around us, though it sounds like empty sentimentality. It actually resonates with the signals of all the life energy we emit. When we give out acceptance, understanding, and tolerance, we're more likely to receive understanding, acceptance, respect, and inclusion in return. Of course, this tolerance I just mentioned involves boundaries, without compromise or resentment, and is genuine acceptance, empathy, and comprehension. Ultimately, the first ones who benefit are ourselves, as well as all our relationships, whether business or personal. When we have smooth connections with ourselves and everyone around us, many things will also become natural and smooth. I hope today's podcast brings you a little inspiration and reflection, and that in the journey ahead, you can embrace, understand, and accept more people and things around you with an open heart. I believe you'll also feel a deeper nourishment for your own life. The way we see and embrace the world is also the way we see and accept our own lives. So, here's to you listening to this episode of the podcast. See you next time.